Hello and welcome. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. You're joining us on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top stories this hour. Russia has launched 643 drones and missiles across Ukraine, killing 4 people and wounding over 40 others, according to Ukrainian officials. Meanwhile, Poland has scrambled jets to defend its airspace amidst NATO warnings, while President Zelensky has urged for stronger global pressure on Moscow. Israeli tanks have pushed deeper into Gaza City's residential areas, including Sabra, Tel Al-Hava, Sheikh Radwan and Al Nasser, with medics warning dozens of injured people are trapped as Israel denied 73 rescue requests. Gaza health authorities reported at least 21 Palestinians killed in strikes today. The U.S. State Department has announced it will revoke Colombian President Gustavo Petro's visa after his comments. A pro-Palestinian protest in New York. President Petro has now returned to Bogota, declaring that he does not care about American authorities further escalating the situation. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has called on all UN member states to immediately implement the restored UN sanctions against Iran. The UN sanctions against Iran have now snapped back into force for the first time since 2015, sending the Iranian rial to a record 1.12 million per dollar. South Korea and the United States have reached a foreign exchange agreement, according to South Korean Finance Minister Koo Yoon-cheol. The deal is separate from currency swap talks that link to President Trump's tariffs on South Korea, with President Lee Jae-myung stressing that Seoul cannot pay the $350 billion investment up front. The U.S. President Donald Trump has now authorized full-force troop deployment to Portland to protect ICE facilities from what he called domestic terrorists, defying Democratic leaders including Oregon Governor Tina Kotek and Portland Mayor Keith Wilson, who have denounced the move. Vietnam has now evacuated thousands and has shut airports as Typhoon Bualoy, with winds up to 133 kilometers per hour, approaching central regions and expected to make landfall today. The storm followed deadly flooding in the Philippines that killed at least 10 people, prompting urgent precautions. Britain's Labour Party has gathered in Liverpool for its annual conference as Prime Minister Keir Starmer faces scrutiny over scandals and plummeting poll ratings amidst rising support for Nigel Farage's hard-right Reform UK party. Meanwhile, Finance Minister Rachel Reeves pushes for a post-Brexit youth migration deal with the EU to boost the economy. United States President Donald Trump has ordered the deployment of military troops to Portland, Oregon, saying they will protect federal immigration facilities against what he called domestic terrorists. In a social media post, Trump said he directed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to secure the city and authorize them to use full force if necessary. The move sparked fierce pushback from local leaders. Portland's Mayor Keith Wilson has said there was no need for troops and warned the president against perpetrating violence. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek has also rejected the deployment, insisting there was no insurrection or threat to national security. Let's listen in to what she said.
Portland's doing just fine. And I made that very clear to the president this morning. Our city is a far cry from the war-ravaged community that he has posted about on social media. And I conveyed that directly to him. That we got this, we are good, we are doing fine. And I also said to him, we have to be careful not to respond to outdated media coverage or misinformation that's out there. We know what's happening in our own city, and we are doing just fine.
Well, the decision comes despite data showing violent crime in Portland has dropped sharply this year, including a 51% fall in homicides. The Pentagon has yet to confirm whether the deployment will involve National Guard or active duty troops. Meanwhile, Homeland Security officials have defended the move, saying ICE facilities need stronger protection amidst recent protests and attacks. Well, Thomas Porteous is joining us live from the United States of America for more on this story. How has this move really panned out there, Thomas, in the U.S., with President Trump ordering troops now to be deployed to Oregon? How are people in Oregon reacting to this move, and what prompted this decision by the American president?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. This comes after a flurry of orders, mainly through two Democratic cities from the U.S. president. It all started earlier on this year with Los Angeles and a mass troop deployment. Donald Trump said that crime is on the rise and therefore that these troops are necessary. Much objection to Gavin Newsom, the California governor, of course, the mayor of the city and the entire local government. That then led to even Marines being seen on the streets of Los Angeles. So this move in Portland is very much part of a pattern. Then, of course, it went on to Memphis, where we saw more of the same. The National Guard was also deployed. And then Washington, D.C., where Donald Trump claimed that you can't even go out for dinner without encountering violent crime. This came also despite of plummeting homicide ratings and crime ratings, and also in Washington, D.C., when these troops were deployed, they were mainly spotted in tourist hotspots, including around the Capitol buildings, etc. And many people criticized and said this is more of a show of power more than a real crime deterrent, as troops weren't in these places where crime was occurring. Donald Trump has threatened further cities as well, Chicago being a main one, where he said we're going in to these cities in a show of force. He has cited Antifa as a threat in Portland, of course, something and a group which isn't per se an organized group. He's declared it a national terrorist organization, which is, of course, unprecedented. Donald Trump often likes to cite Antifa as a cause of violence and political discourse across the region. Of course, a left-wing group, which is present at many right-wing protests in America. But of course, this will just play into the ever-growing bipartisan rhetoric inside here in the United States.
Absolutely. But, also we are picking up reactions from on ground in the state where he's planning this for. The Oregon governor has come out with a strong statement, and so has the Portland mayor against this move. They believe it's unnecessary, and they're also fearful of more polarization if this indeed is done and implemented on ground in their state.
Well, of course, this is a unprecedented move. This has never been used before. Donald Trump is using a very old law here in putting these troops into these cities. Usually they require a governor-level approval to order a federal guard in, like is happening in Oregon, or is going to happen in Oregon. However, Donald Trump is overriding the Democratic lower leadership, and he's saying, no, I decide what happens here, and he has decided to assert his dominance over these Democratic-run cities in a show of force, much to the dismay, of course, to the governors, the mayors of all the cities that these troops now roam the streets of.
All right, we're getting more news, in fact, that we're tracking this hour from the U.S. United States President Donald Trump has said on Sunday that there is a real chance for greatness in the Middle East. Without providing specific details or a timetable, in a Truth Social post, he added, all are on board for something special. First time ever. We will get it done, quote unquote. Trump is scheduled to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday at the White House, aiming to reach a framework for a deal. He also said talks on Gaza with Middle Eastern nations have been intense, and that both Israel and Hamas are aware of the discussions, which will continue as long as required. Let's in fact listen into what the U.S. Vice President had to say.
With regard to Gaza, President Trump said that it's, quote, looking like we have a deal that would end the war, bring the hostages back. Can you tell us any more details about that and when we might see that deal roll out?
These things can get derailed at the very last minute. So while I remain very hopeful, I am cautiously hopeful. I'm going to let the diplomats continue to work on this. But our principle here is very simple. We want all the hostages to come home. We want Hamas to no longer be a terror threat to the state of
Thomas Porteous is live with us, in fact, from New York on this big story. Thomas, we are, of course, getting a hint of what perhaps could be in the offing with Vice President J.D. Vance saying there in that soundbite that we just played out that he's hopeful for some sort of deal. President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, has said that there is a chance for greatness in the Middle East. What is he implying, Thomas?
Well, it's quite unclear, actually, Uday, what is actually going on here, because we are just following the statements 2 days ago, which Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the UNGA, still maintaining that this war does not seem to be anywhere near over. He said that unrelentlessly that the Israeli forces will continue to go ahead with its highly controversial and widely objected against offensive into Gaza City with the international community's outcry. But of course, then Donald Trump, these statements, it sounds, of course, in the Trump fashion, that something is in motion. We, of course, saw those leaders, Arabic leaders and Islamic leaders, meet with Donald Trump at the start of UNGA week in order to discuss a deal coming out of that region. And so it is unclear whether things have changed. Of course, we did also see that huge statement from President Donald Trump after Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, speak, and he said that Israel won't annex the West Bank. Now, this is hugely significant, as this clearly is the first time that showing that there might be some sort of indifferences here between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump when it comes to the future plans of Israel. But of course,
we also do know that there is a meeting of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu expected tomorrow. What is expected in that meeting? What's on the agenda?
Yeah, of course, we don't exactly know what is on the agenda tomorrow. It's a hugely unpopular war worldwide, but of course in America here as well. Donald Trump says he puts America first. This war is hugely unpopular here. We saw thousands and thousands of people gather here in the streets of New York City to protest Benjamin Netanyahu's attendance here in the United States, of course, defying an ICC warrant, who the United States is not subjected to, but a lot of New Yorkers here wanted to see him arrested. And so it is a hugely, hugely unpopular war. So we are expecting some announcement because in regards to a peace deal, negotiations have fallen completely flat over the past few months, especially given since those attacks in Qatar by the Israeli forces.
Thomas, appreciate you joining us with those details. Meanwhile, Hamas has announced that it has lost contact with 2 hostages amidst intensified Israeli military operations in Gaza City. The armed wing of Hamas, the Al-Qassam brigades, have said that the loss of communication with the 2 prisoners occurred due to heavy Israeli strikes over the past 48 hours, particularly in the Sabra and Tal al-Hawa neighborhoods. These areas have seen a sharp increase in air and ground assaults by the IDF forces. Meanwhile, the Israeli army continues its offensive with artillery units firing towards Gaza from the border and tanks advancing deeper into residential districts. Israeli air forces have targeted 140 military infrastructure across Gaza, including militants. Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations, is joining us live from Minneapolis. Andrew, thanks for being with us on NewsX World today. What do you make of this offensive that, of course, continues, this on-ground offensive by the IDF? And amidst that, this news that 2 hostages' communication has been cut off.
I think the Hamas's choice of words is quite telling. Communication has been cut off. And that can be for one of 2 reasons, one of which is the fog of war, that the Israelis have disrupted Hamas's communications and they've simply lost touch with the troops that are holding these hostages. The other option, which is far more unpleasant, is that the Israelis, in pursuit of their military objectives, have inadvertently killed or seriously wounded, incapacitated these two hostages. Time will tell. It remains to be seen. I'm pretty sure that the Israelis didn't deliberately set out to kill these two hostages, but in war, innocent civilians are killed, and in war, the fog of war settles in and communications are disrupted.
Yes. Now, as far as the on-ground offensive is concerned, what are you expecting in the next few days, Andrew? Are you expecting this offensive to continue and only gather pace, or do you believe perhaps we might be seeing a sort of a deal reached? Netanyahu is in the U.S. He's scheduled to meet with Donald Trump tomorrow.
It's unclear to me what a deal would look like that would satisfy Benjamin Netanyahu and his base in Israel. He has promised that he will destroy Hamas as a military actor, but also as a political actor, and that he will free the hostages. And it's unclear to me that there's anything that Hamas would agree to in the short term that would fulfill those requirements. That being the case, it's likely that the ground offensive will continue. It will grind on. There will continue to be casualties on the Israeli side, but many civilian casualties as well as Hamas casualties on the other side. And until Benjamin Netanyahu either gets the hostages back or achieves his other strategic or political objectives, I really don't see what kind of deal President Trump could possibly broker.
All right. We're turning now to more developments that we're tracking this hour. Gaza is continuing to face famine as displaced Palestinians struggle to access food and water. There's no food, no water. Life is unbearably expensive. In plain words, this is famine, quote unquote, is what a displaced resident has said. Rights experts warn that the humanitarian crisis has worsened by Israel's military siege, and this amounts to severe deprivation, while Israel says its actions are in self-defense. The World Health Organization reports that 4 health facilities in Gaza City have shut down this month, and several malnutrition centers have also closed, highlighting the severity of the crisis. Let's listen in to some displaced Palestinians.
لا في أكل ولا شرب، الحياة غالية، مش غالي يعني شيء فاحش، شايف كيف؟ وإيش بدي أقول لك يعني ولا في شغل ولا في عمل ولا في حاجة بتدخل علينا، إحنا شايف كيف؟ اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد، يعني بالعربي الفصيح مجاعة رسمي.
والله بيجوا ناس كثير وانت عارف الوضع وكل الناس نازحه من قطاع غزه اجت هان، والله ادوب الواحد لما الواحد لحق له يعني شيء بسيط يعني مش الكميه اللي تقول انك تقدر توفر لاطفالنا ولاولادنا، لا والله الكميه مش كثير.
Now, Iran has condemned the reinstatement of United Nations sanctions over its nuclear program after the collapse of talks with Western powers and Israeli and U.S. strikes on its nuclear sites. The measures, which bar dealings linked to the Islamic Republic's nuclear and ballistic missile activities, took effect overnight after Western powers triggered the so-called snapback mechanism under the 2015 nuclear code. Let's in fact listen into what Iranian citizens had to say about the sanctions.
سازی که خریدم 3 میلیون تومان الان شده 30 میلیون تومان. چرا؟ چون دیگه وارد نمیتونیم بکنیم اون ساز رو. به خاطر این حالا قاچاقی و هر شیوه‌ای که وارد میشه اون توسعه رو علاقه من تاثیر بده. حالا علاقه رو بزنیم کنار، دارو هستش، خیلی از داروها وارداتی ان، اونا رو خیلی‌ها نمیتونن استفاده بکنن واسه خب مبه این چیزا بود
بدبخت میشیم. یعنی واقعا دیگه مردم عادی واقعا شاید نتونن زندگی عادی که الان دارن داشته باشن دیگه. میدونی یعنی قیمت همه چی که بره بالا و اون حقوقی که دولت میده به خصوص اونایی که حقوق بگیرن نمیتونن زندگیشون رو اداره کنن. ازدواج کم میشه، اگه کسی میخواد دانشگاه بره، بچهای کار زیاد میشن. چون خیلی از خانواده‌ها نمیتونن دیگه بچه‌هاشون بفرستن مدرسه. میدونی این معضلات به وجود میاد دیگه.
گرونی ها همین الانش کمر مردم رو تا کرده، حالا دیگه واردات سخت‌تر میشه، صادرات که اصلا احتمالاً نخواهیم داشت و مشکلات بیشتر میشه. من فکر کنم حاکمیت اصلا براش مهم نیست. یعنی تصورم اینه که مشکل برای اونها ایجاد نمیشه، مشکل برای مردمه. به راحتی الان گوش شده که 1 میلیون تومان ایران با حقوق 12 تا 15 میلیون تومانی چجوری خانواده زندگی بکنه؟
Well, in fact, Israel has welcomed the reinstatement of broad UN sanctions against Iran. They say they were a direct response to what it called violations committed by the Islamic Republic in its nuclear program. This is a major development in response to Iran's ongoing violations, especially on its military nuclear program. The Foreign Ministry said on X, the goal is clear: prevent a nuclear-armed Iran. The world must use every tool to achieve this goal, quote unquote. Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations, is with us live on this story from Minneapolis. Andrew, what do you make of this latest statement from Israel vis-a-vis Iran?
Well, the Israeli statement is correct, and the underlying facts were predictable. The deal that was done back in 2015 involved both carrots and sticks. The carrot for Iran was cease your military nuclear program, and we will give you all kinds of sanctions relief in terms of trade, access to your funds overseas, etc. And in return, you must not only cease the program, but you must allow international inspectors to inspect these so-called civilian nuclear sites. So the International Atomic Energy Agency was tasked with that. And then the stick. If you break this deal, if you violate the terms of this deal, the sanctions will snap back into place. And that is what has happened because Iran has, first of all, the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, and Iran has been in violation of that deal for a long time, enriching uranium to 60%, which is in violation of the terms, obviously has a military nuclear program well underway. And finally, the E3, the three European powers, Germany, France, and the UK, have decided enough is enough, and they're going to invoke the snapback terms of the original deal, the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. And so that's what has happened here. I'm a little surprised that the Europeans have done this. It seems slightly out of character for them, but they certainly have. And from an Israeli perspective, this is a welcome development. Not only does it harm Iran and undermine its ability to pursue a military nuclear program, but it signals to the world that Iran is in their bad graces again because it is violating not only a treaty, but a global taboo against the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And from an Israeli perspective, that must be a welcome development.
Iran, though, is outraged. Iran's parliament has condemned this. Andrew, the people on ground who our correspondent spoke with seem pretty upset.
Yes, well, not without cause. I mean, again, in terms of the legalities, Iran certainly is in violation. There's really no doubt about that. But the implications of all this for the Iranian person in the street are tragic. It's going to result in more unemployment, more poverty, more famine and hunger. Also, in terms of nationalist sentiment, it frames Iran in a very negative light. It enhances or increases or intensifies the isolation of Iran as an international actor. None of this is going to help your average Iranian in the street.
Andrew Latham, thank you for joining us with your perspective on that story. Now, youth in Peru's capital city of Lima have taken to the streets yesterday for another round of protests against their president, Dina Boluarte. This comes a week after clashes in Lima left more than a dozen police officers, protesters and journalists injured. The Saturday protests saw riot police deploying tear gas and dispersing groups of protesters off the streets in Lima as tensions continue to escalate. Let's listen in to a few protesters who clashed with the police during the rally.
Es un gobierno de corruptos, criminales, que han agarrado los mecanismos que servían para la democracia para sus propios intereses.
Lo que les espero es que todo sale como la generación nuestra quiere, es que ellos salgan, ¿no? Que salgan todos en la lacra del Congreso, la verdad.
Nos quieren meter terror, nos quieren amedrentar, pero todo lo contrario. Nosotros seguimos en pie de lucha. La jornada recién ha iniciado la semana pasada y vamos a continuar todas las semanas hasta que caiga este Congreso y el gobierno corrupto y usurpador.
¿Cansado de qué? Cansado de este gobierno, cansado de la corrupción, cansado de los robos. Hace poco me robaron a mano armada. Fui a poner una denuncia y no me ayudaron. Los policías simplemente no hicieron nada.
The previous demonstrations began on September 20th last week in response to pension reforms, which would be requiring all Peruvians over 18 to join a pension provider. Although experts say that the discontent has been simmering for some time, fueled by corruption scandals, economic insecurity and long-standing anger at the Peruvian President Boluarte and the Congress. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has strongly condemned NATO's recent threats to shoot down Russian or Belarusian aircraft, calling them foolish and ill-considered. He warned any such action would trigger an instant response. Lukashenko also highlighted Belarus's cooperation with Poland, notifying Warsaw about 9 to 12 drones flying near its airspace, and questioned NATO's aggressive stance. Moreover, he criticized Poland's decision to close its border with Belarus, labeling it a bigger scam. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more updates from around the world. Stay tuned.